Ahoy! The dev update for October just came out and is absolutely packed with extremely exciting news like Transmog, cross servers, melee buffs, combat changes and much more, so let's get into it. This episode was a bit different because the New World to Go podcast hosts were hosting the show itself and were asking the devs a lot of questions, so you'll notice that in some parts. We'll begin with some things that the devs are planning to do in the near future. The leaderboards that were announced to come with Brimstone Sands originally are still being worked on. They know they missed the date on that. They had some priority shifts, but will release them once ready. Generally, at the moment, they're planning and working on the content for the next 9 to 12 months. The next things that they can definitely talk about are things that we'll see in December. One of those is the return of the Winter Convergence event, but also a new expedition. This one is unique insofar that it will merge two existing expeditions, Emrine and Starstone, as a mutated version for high-level players. Also by December, we'll be seeing an updated roadmap. They're currently also still working on the Sandworm raid, which they say is going to be very difficult. They want it to be near impossible, and it will show up on the PTR at some point in the future. Along with that, they are also working on territory control changes. They pretty much always said in the next month, but then corrected themselves to by March for sure, so I'm guessing they're giving themselves that extra leniency in terms of time. They're probably hoping to release it before March, but think that is the latest date for the territory control changes. What they want to change is how you assert your influence in the open world, also how you can deck for wars, I'm not quite sure what they mean by that, and how many people need to be slotted from your company for wars. There are also bigger changes that they're not ready to talk about yet, but they talk about kind of later on anyways, so we'll get to that. There will also be a new spring event called Springtime Bloom. A very exciting thing for most regions is the plan to make cross-server outpost rush possible. They said that once it is working and tuned well, the same tech can also easily be applied to other modes. This could obviously refer to Arena, but I imagine in the long run we might also see PvE content like a cross-server dungeon finder. Another thing that they're still working on is the gear management system. They're taking it slowly here so they can make it much better and you can very quickly switch between gear sets once it is released. They haven't specifically looked into moving items around in your inventory because currently you just sort them by different things but you can't drag them around. And they will be putting some of these things on the PTR likely sooner rather than later, but that doesn't mean that we should expect them to come out immediately. What they announced on the forums recently is that they're kind of changing how PTR works, and they will apply changes to PTR that may not make it into the next big patch, just because they want to test them for longer and see the impact of them. So this is something they might do with the gear management system, since they kind of haven't tested tech like this before, so they want to make sure it definitely works and doesn't cause any issues. They also teased another expedition that they're currently working on, and this one will be themed around the Varangian Knights. I really like that because I feel like we've got a lot of corruption and ancient so far, so some more variety will be nice. They're also planning to add improvements to the group finder and want to make it more streamlined somehow. A very big thing that they announced is that there will be a Transmog system, so you can use existing gear's visuals on other gear. They recommended saving gear that you really like looks-wise already, so that you can use it once the system comes out. I'm actually very impressed that this is a change they're making, since I think that it is going to take a little bit of profit away from the cosmetics they're selling, because they have a lot of very nice looking skins that just aren't efficient stat-wise. So in my opinion, that makes it a very player-friendly move. When asked about an in-game barbershop, they said they consider this a really important feature, but are currently not actively working towards it, but it's definitely going to happen at some point. The next topic was Fresh Start servers, or Fresh Start worlds as they refer to them. These will be happening on November 2nd, that's at least the date they're still setting so far, and not all worlds will open at the same time this time. Instead, they will be doing a slow rollout of worlds over time, and then you'd kind of choose which one you want to go for. Obviously, since these are fresh start servers, you won't be able to transfer into them, and they have the new overhauled starting experience. Along with the fresh servers, there will be the Return to Aeternum event. This is a creator campaign similar to the Battle for New World, but it is somewhat more fleshed out in my opinion. So the teams for this event will be from US, EU and LATAM. For some reason, no OCE sadly. And they will be playing in an own private environment, as they call it. So basically they have their own servers in the beginning. There will be 4 teams and there will be 3 captains per team. And each team will have their own world. Within this world they need to accomplish a bunch of objectives. And they describe this as kind of a bingo card. So when they complete 6 out of 8 objectives on their first card, which are the easiest tasks, they can then move on to the next set of harder tasks. There are 4 sets of objectives or 4 bingo cards ranging from easiest to hardest. And each of these sets of objectives or each of these bingo cards is tied to a specific Twitch drop. They already said these drops get cooler the further you go, so each team will be very encouraged to stay ahead in the race because obviously then people will be watching them if they have the next Twitch drop already. So it's gonna be a constant race to the end. It sounds like a very cool format in my opinion. When this event is over, the servers that this happened on will actually be joinable for normal players. So if you're a viewer of one of these content creators, you can join them on these servers once the event is over. But normal fresh start worlds will be happening alongside with that. They plan when this video was recorded to release more info on the 24th, so that would be today. The next segment were the combat changes. First, they acknowledged that there will always going to be things to fix and balance around a variety of situations. The game is never fully balanced, which is a good mindset to have. Generally, they're planning to do a more heavy-handed balance approach when it comes to mode-specific balance. For example, reducing healing in Arena after a while, or the increase to 600 gear score minimum in Outpost Rush if you have lower gear scores, so you get bumped up, and only players with 625 have a fair bit of an advantage still. They talked about some pain point weapons. The first one of those is the Rapier. They say the escapability of the weapon is just too much right now, and it was never meant for that. It was meant to be an aggressive weapon, even though now it's rightfully being used defensively because it can be used for it. There are nerfs coming, but they don't want to nerf it into oblivion, and I think a lot of the nerfs that they were talking about in that show are the ones that already happened with this patch. I have a feeling that maybe them having a conversation about it may have encouraged these changes to go a little bit further last minute as well. They want people to be able to run away, but the Rapier is just taking it too far and is not fun to play against. I think this sentiment echoes what many people have been saying about the Rapier for a very long time. In competitive companies, this is something that was basically said since the very early days, so I'm very glad that this is being approached now, and I think the changes that we're seeing so far are absolutely taking it in the right direction. Another weapon that was addressed is the Musket. Here it was said that it's weak in PvE but strong in PvP and hard to balance for both. I guess with PvP they're primarily referring to OPR here. A change they're currently testing is a damage fall off over distance. I know that's something that a lot of people have asked for. And they're also considering the stamina damage to be something worth looking at, so that the Musket could be countered more effectively with shields. This makes a lot of sense to me. I think with heavy shields it's already very easy, and I've done this plenty, but with light shields it's not quite equally effective, and maybe they want the shield to just be a full counter to the Musket. They said they still need to think about how they approach the PvE side of things for the Musket without it affecting the PvP side. The third weapon that was brought up was the Fire Staff, and more specifically the Flamethrower as a pain point. What they're saying they want to change about that is the mana consumption, so that the Flamethrower is no longer basically infinite. Another topic that was discussed when it comes to combat was armor balance and blocking. The first change they talked about is already in the game now, which is the reduced time after a block break. Additionally, on PTR they also looked into increased mobility while blocking. They also look at the stamina damage balance. Sometimes they say it feels like you take too much stamina damage while blocking. And they would also like to do something about blocking in group combat, because at the moment you basically get block broken instantly in most situations. So they want to figure out how to balance that without making blocking into a too powerful weapon in 1v1 situations. To talk more about PvP later, we'll follow the chronological order in which they went through things. So the next topic that they talked about was horizontal progression. They mentioned the hard runes as an example, and they say that this is something that you'll see as a pattern more often in the future, though there are no immediate plans for it. The next topic to be brought up were the changes to damage reduction on enemies. Mobs used to be resistant to certain damage types, and those negative resistances, as they call them, have been removed. Now you can only get weapons that are stronger to certain mobs, and the problem that was pointed out is that even though these exist, some weapons like Hatchet just always end up being better in PvE. The dev said that if a weapon like the Hatchet is so strong that the bonus of another weapon against a type like, for example, Strike versus Ancient, so Hammer, isn't enough to get you to switch, then that is a problem with the Hatchet. Now this one I think will be extremely difficult to fix because DPS wise some weapons just do way better in PvE than others, and if you also want to balance them for PvP, that's going to be a very fine line to walk. I'm pretty sure there will always be some form of best in slot weapon. The next segments brought us back to PvP. A question that the devs were asked was, what is your ideal picture of PvP in OPR? They said they'd like to see a mix of all weapons. And based on the way that things currently are, they said they'd like it to be a little more melee oriented and more viability for melee in general. In this context, they once again mentioned the Rapier as a counter to melees. They also want more blocking, as they already mentioned, and they also want more depth. They mention Sword and Shield as an example here, where basically at the moment you're just doing the leaping strike combo to go in. They say that they want you to feel like you're leading the charge when you're going in there as a melee. Not sure how they want to do that, but it sounds interesting. At the same time, they say they also love having snipers as an element of the game, so they're not planning to remove the musket. They're considering changing the scoring rules in certain game modes like Outpost Rush, incentivizing behavior that makes for more fun matches and playing the objective. They're also not happy with the state of Arena because they think it's very frustrating to queue versus 3 stacks as a solo queue, so they want to split it into the group queue and the solo queue or solo plus 2-man queue. Role queue for Outpost Rush was brought up, but they have no immediate plans for that. The next big topic were territory changes. They want to change wars in various ways and started doing that by doing the revenue share change with Brimstone Sands patch. However, they're not done. Things they are testing on the PTR and that they are looking to implement in the future are, first of all, the war cooldown. This will make it so that you likely have a 3-day cooldown for going to war for a company after leaving a company. Additionally, they also want to introduce company minimums for wars, especially when defending. They aren't quite sure about the numbers yet, but they definitely want to have you have most of your company members being the one to hold the territory. They're also introducing a war fatigue, which limits the amounts of wars that you can have per day, and this will be account-wide. So if you have multiple characters on the same server that are on the same account, you will still not be able to war with them. You basically have to have a completely separate account to do that. Along with that, they're planning to introduce extremely interesting changes to open world PvP. They're thinking about introducing time windows to push influence in specific zones. Not just for 1 hour or so, like a few hours instead, but something that prevents 2 AM pushes and kind of encourages PvP in the area instead. In order to further incentivize that, these areas might have something like multiple forts or at least multiple control points, which will give you increased influence while running some form of PvP mission. They were asked if they were planning to introduce any anti-Zerg mechanics in that context. They said that anything like that would need to be playtested. I think one of the examples that they have is the teleport out of forts when there's too many people around. They're thinking that maybe there could be a lock window for forts again, though I'm not quite sure how that would prevent Zerging. What they're hoping is that the multiple forts and different locations for faction missions would create multiple hotspots across the area and therefore split the attention a little bit anyways. Quite a while ago they brought up practice wars. So basically an option to play a war similar to Outpost Rush and just queue up for it without the whole company thing around it. They want to do that still, but it's not on the roadmap right this second, they just have higher priorities at the moment. Next, they talked about crafting. In terms of progression, they want consistently from gathering to refining to crafting and not constant spammed repeat crafts of the same thing. The double XP feature is definitely taking things in the right direction here. When it comes to golden scarabs and timeless shards, they feel like rolling an item is kind of like gambling in a way, and they feel like the whole thing in terms of balancing is a very thin line. They don't want to make it too easy or too hard. They want to give more agency to players, which is achieved through things like golden scarabs and timeless shards. One quote that stands out to me regarding their philosophy is, "There is best in slot and almost best in slot, And for a lot of people, almost best in slot is good enough. When asked if they had plans for new trade skills, they said they have plans, but they have nothing specific to say. They're taking inspiration from other open world games and what's fun in there. They want to make sure that when they introduce trade skills, they integrate them into the world and make them somehow impactful. When asked about a recipe overview system for things you've learned, they said they have no current plans for that, but will look into it. They also said something slightly vague about wanting to give us more depth and your rewards to be more specific when crafting, and then said, I'll just say I'm really excited for the future. I have a feeling that they may be hinting at specialized crafting here, like for example, instead of weapon crafting, you're doing spear crafting or something like that. Just a hunch though, nothing they said in the show specifically. Then they talked about Brimstone Sands. They said you will be able to fight the Sandworm, we kind of know that already, and they said it will take more than 5 players. After defeating him, you will also somehow be able to learn more about him and his lore. The Brimstone quests are now the new standard for quests going forward in terms of the different types they have, the variety, the density of quests, and the story. They want to introduce more historical and mythological characters going forward, like they for example did with the Egyptian and Roman characters in Brimstone or the Arthurian in Monarchs. In terms of zone size, Brimstone Sands is the exception to the rule. Generally, it is definitely towards the large end because it's a desert and they wanted the desert to be vast. The standard for zone sizes would be closer to Evanscale or Reekwater. In the future, they are thinking of potentially having big themed areas that are similar in some ways but split into multiple zones. So overall, very exciting news, and if you'd like to hear more exciting news, then please consider subscribing and clicking the bell if you appreciated this summary. Tomorrow we'll be talking about an interesting boss and weapon farm that I have spent way too much time at this point. Generally, as a melee, PvP and war enjoyer, I am very happy with many of the changes that they're hinting at, so I'm very much looking forward to what they have in store for us, especially with the roadmap in December as well. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching. Dukesloth out.